You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network.
Hey Ramblers, today's episode is brought to you by Fangoria. Since 1979, Fangoria has been the authority in the world of contemporary horror. As the only sanctuary for horror aficionados in its early days, it has now grown into an empire that expands beyond its celebrated magazine. From t-shirts, coffee mugs, beanies, enamel pins, there's something for every horror fanatic in your world, even if it's you. So head on over to shop.fangoria.com/pencil and paper productions or use code pencil and paper productions at checkout to get 20% off your first order or magazine subscription. Yes, it is a mouthful, which is why there are links in the show notes down below. That's shop.fangoria.com/pencil and paper productions or code pencil and paper productions at checkout for 20% off. Fangoria, first in fright since 1979.
Try it or we'll tear your soul apart.
You're listening to the Horror Ramblings podcast, the show about all things horror. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Horror Ramblings podcast, the podcast about all things horror. This is your host, Les, and today I am flying solo. Stephen is lost somewhere in the hallowed halls of horror, trying to find his way back. Will he make it? I'm not sure, but I really hope so because I don't like hosting by myself. Anyways, today is going to be a little bit different of a show, just because I normally just go right off the top of my head for things, but I actually wrote out a little bit for this show, and I'm going to follow sort of a script, as it were, a blueprint, really, of what the subject will be. But before we get into the subject, I just want to say real quick that I had the pleasure of being on another podcast. I did a YouTube live with them, actually, with Luna and Kat over at Delight in Fright. I will make sure that we have some kind of link posted to that video so that you guys can check it out and just search them up, check out their stuff. They are on social media and they were a lot of fun to talk with. And if you want to see my ugly mug, you can check out the YouTube video that we did. We did a review of the Babadook, which was a lot of fun. And if any of you have not seen the Babadook, please take the time to give it a watch. It's definitely an interesting film, to say the least. Other than that, I'm just going to kind of hop right into the show. So before we get right into it, I'm just going to say that today's episode is definitely a special one. We're going to dedicate this episode to celebrating Tony Todd, which unfortunately, anybody that's listening knows that he has unfortunately passed away. And he's definitely left a indelible mark on horror cinema and cinema in general. He was the candy man for most of us. And his name definitely conjures up images of some of the most chilling moments in film. But he wasn't just a horror icon. He had a long career and he became known for not just his work in horror, but sci-fi roles, drama, and even as a voice actor. So I kind of want to dive into some of his career and the legacy of Tony Todd. So just a little history lesson for everyone. I want to go back to the beginning. Tony Todd was born on December 4th, 1954 in Washington, D.C. Growing up, he was drawn to the arts, and he eventually found his way to the University of Connecticut. And that's where he began to study theater. After college, he trained at the prestigious Eugene O'Neill National Theater Institute, which was an experience that really laid the foundation for his extremely powerful stage presence and, let's be honest, that incredible voice that he... Now, of course, he didn't break into Hollywood just overnight, but eventually all of the training, all of the dedication, it did pay off. And he did start in smaller television roles, and he was in stage performances, and it really allowed him to hone the craft and give him that unique presence that really made him stand out in every role that he took. Which, let's be honest, any film that you would have seen him in, or anything that you would have seen him in or heard him in, you know that he was just a powerful force to be seen, to be heard. Now, again, I'm just going to say this for a lot of us, the first time that we saw Tony Todd was in Candyman, which was released in 1992. It was directed by Bernard Rose, and it was more than just a horror movie. It was a dark and tragic story about race, violence, and folklore. And at the center of all of this was Tony Todd as Candyman, a character that was terrifying and strangely sympathetic in ways that make more sense as you go back to this film and revisit it and you think. Obviously, this role wasn't an easy one for him. It was definitely physically and emotionally demanding, and his commitment to the character was definitely unmatched. He famously agreed at the time to perform his scenes with live bees. He didn't use a stunt double, which, let's be real, is an intense commitment, and it added this authenticity to the character. His deep voice and his commanding presence on the screen turned the Candyman into a horror icon. And unlike most horror villains, Candyman wasn't just a figure of fear. There was a lot of complexity and a deep tragedy to this character. Tony made us feel for Candyman's plight, even as he scared the hell out of us. Now, this portrayal definitely broke boundaries, and it still remains iconic today. And partly it's because Tony infused so much of himself into the role. Candyman was one of the first horror characters to break through as a truly multifaceted black lead. He showed audience that horror could explore themes of love, loss, and identity, and do it in ways that were meaningful and terrifying. Candyman became a symbol, and Tony's portrayal helped the character and the film achieve this lasting place in horror history. And on a little side note, I always find it interesting, and I always bring it up in my own personal life when I talk about horror with people, that there was a clause in his contract. Every time he would get stung by a bee, he would get paid a certain amount of money. And he endured something like 37 bee stings in this film. It's a fun little fact. It's something that if you've never looked up before, look at it. It is something that I like to bring. But let's keep going. Let's just keep talking about how amazing Tony Todd was. And although he did some other things other than horror, I'm going to talk a little bit more about horror, and then I'm going to shift to something else real quick. But let's talk about how much he meant to horror, because he didn't just stop with Candyman. He continued to make a name for himself in the horror community with other just unforgettable roles. One of his most famous roles is in the Final Destination series, where he played this ominous coroner, Mr. Bloodworth. He appeared in multiple films in the series, and his character had this almost mystical understanding of death's plan, and he gave this cryptic advice to those who tried to really cheat fate. His character was eerie and philosophical, and Tony's calm, deep voice just added this layer of dread to every single scene that he was in. Just put you in this place where you just weren't sure what you were thinking. Obviously, this role also helped to solidify his place in horror as a figure tied to the concept of death itself, which is a fitting role to an actor who had already become an icon of fear and of terror. Now, one of my personal favorite movies, and I am jumping around here, but one of my other favorite films that he was in was Wishmaster. Even though his role was smaller, it just continued to help cement his place as a horror legend. His presence in this film just helped his growing reputation escalate further. And although his part in the film might not have been a huge part, it's still enough to always go back and say, hey, I know this movie. Tony Todd's in this movie, because he just stood out so much, because every scene he was in, he just stole. And that was another thing about him that was an astonishing thing. Now, something a little bit newer, not as new, but newer, we have the Hatchet series, which connected him to this resurgence of slasher films that happened in the 2000s. Now, in each of these roles, he continued to establish himself as a true icon, able to take characters who might seem like minor characters or villains and send them to this unforgettable part of each film and just make them memorable. Now, I could go on about some other horror films and some other horror things that he's been in, but there was a lot more to him than just that. And I am going to kind of get into that because I feel like it's important to talk about more than just the horror side of Tony Todd, because there was more than just the horror side of it. Now, his talents weren't just limited to horror, and he proved how versatile he was, range of genre. Like in Star Trek, when he played Kern, who is the brother of Worf, something that brought this emotional depth to the show and to the character itself. He was a character that was torn between his honor and his family loyalty. This role showed that he could deliver intense character-driven performances outside of horror, which added layers to one of sci-fi's most beloved franchises. Of course, then there was his work on The Flash, where he voiced Zoom, one of the show's most terrifying villains. Even though it was just his voice, Tony's voice made the character feel larger than life. His voice acting created just this unsettling atmosphere, and it gave the character this fearsome presence, which just proved that Tony's powerful voice could make a character terrifying even without physical form on screen. In recent work, Tony took the role of Venom in the Marvel Spider-Man 2 video game, and like anything, his chilling and deep voice gave life to one of the most beloved Marvel anti-heroes of all time, adding this dark edge to Venom that fans have just praised, and personally, I have just loved. Which, again, just shows how his voice on its own could be so powerful. Now, we can't forget about his roles in films like Rock and in Platoon. In The Rock, he played Captain Darrow, a loyal, intense soldier, bringing a raw intensity to this amazing action. And in Platoon, his portrayal of Warren brought another layer to Oliver Stone's gritty Vietnam War story that people just have praised all these years. And even though these were supporting roles, Tony Todd was able to leave an impression that was just hard to forget, which I really feel showed that he could handle any genre that he was a part of. Now, into a more personal note, something that I kind of want to bring up within this. I want to talk about his impact on pop culture. And afterwards, I'm going to share a story with you guys. But beyond the roles, he left a huge impact on pop that went beyond the screen. He became a fixture at horror conventions. Fans would line up to meet the man behind some of their favorite characters. He was known for being approachable, for taking the time to connect with fans. And his commitment to his fan base only strengthened his legacy, which just made him more than just an actor whose work you could follow. It made him into someone who you really wanted to root for, who you really wanted to care about. His influence extended to future horror creators and actors as well. He showed that horror could be complex, that even the scariest characters could have this depth and emotion. His work helped bring respect and credibility to the horror genre, something that had been lacking in certain years. And it allowed this new generation of horror creators to come in with this same passion and commitment and create some amazing things. Now, speaking of the convention circuit, I just want to put this out there. We had the pleasure of meeting Tony Todd at one of the conventions. My wife is not a huge horror fan, but Candyman is one of her favorite films. And she loves Tony Todd, loves him. And we got the chance to do a photo with him. And we had our children with us. And our youngest dropped her pacifier on the floor. And he quickly picked it up and he looked at us and he said, "Make sure you sterilized it." We were like, "Of course we will. And we took our picture, and he paused for a minute. He looked at our family and he said, "I just want to say thank you for sharing your blessings with me." Just so subtle, that scary voice that you hear when you think of him, that deep voice, was also just calming and reassuring. We only had one conversation with him, but in that moment we felt like we had known him for years. And it's one of those things where you meet certain people and you just know that they're good people. And Tony Todd was definitely one of those people. He had a unique ability to make audiences feel a range of emotion. He brought this just energy to every role that he played. Even when he was playing monsters, there was this strong sense of humanity in his performance. It's clear that he really respected the craft of performing and that he put everything into what he was doing, no matter what genre it was, no matter what kind of movie. For the fans, he was more than an actor. He was an icon, and he was someone who you could just feel a friendship just by meeting him one time. So to anyone out there who's listening, put on a Tony Todd film. It doesn't matter what one. Whatever you want to watch. Put on Candyman if you like. But think of him as you and remember him and keep his legacy alive, because he was an astonishing person. And his work will live on. It will remind us every day of how unforgettable he was and just how amazing this human being was. Not just as an actor, but as an icon, as a friend, as a member of this amazing horror community that we have. So, Ramblers, today I want you to think of Tony Todd. I would love to hear your take on him. Do you think he was a horror icon? Maybe I'll put that up as our poll. I would think that the answer would be a resounding yes. But again, I just want to say that Tony Todd, you will be missed by all of us here at the horror community. And there's going to be this huge void now that you're gone. So, Ramblers, all I'll say is this. You know where to find us. Find us where all your podcasts are. Look us up on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Instagram. We are under Horror Ramblings. All you got to do is search us online. Go to Pencil Paper Productions. Check out the whole website. There's more than just the Horror Ramblings podcast on there, but go to pencilpaperproductions.com and you can click the tab. You can see our show. You can see multiple other shows. Steven never gives himself a shout out on the show, but that site has a lot of other shows on it as well that are really fantastic. So that is going to be it today, Ramblers. It's a short episode just paying a little bit of tribute to an amazing actor who I hope I will get to talk about again on the show with Steven. Other than that, guys, please be safe out there and stay spooky out there.
This has been the Horror Ramblings podcast. Join us next time for even more.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.